She just wanted to stay unnoticed, young, poor and invisible, even to the mirror. But one night, as she was mopping the marble floor of a luxurious hotel, an old song slipped from her lips, and at that very moment, a powerful man stopped in his tracks and began to feel. He was a billionaire marked by pain, she, a soul scarred by life. And when their eyes met, something impossible began to bloom. But what he would do for love, no one could predict. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe to the channel and tell us, where are you listening from? Your support is what allows us to keep sharing stories that heal, move, and inspire. Emma Taylor moved through the narrow streets of Willow Creek, as if she belonged more to the wind than to the world. People passed by her every day, men in suits, women with shopping bags, children dragging backpacks. But rarely did anyone look her in the eyes. At 19, she had already learned how to be invisible, and yet there was a quiet dignity in her steps. Her life was built on silences. The silence of being abandoned by her father at 5, the silence of her mother's last breath, the silence of late nights spent listening to her grandmother's wheezing lungs in the tiny wooden house they shared near the edge of town. Emma took care of everything. Bills, medicines, the cracked roof. She worked part-time making baby clothes for the local church and picked herbs to sell in jars. But it was during the night shift that her soul disappeared behind a uniform and a badge. She was a cleaner at the Cypress Bay Hotel, the most luxurious resort along the Pacific coastline. Marble floors, chandeliers, guests with names that filled magazines. And Emma, kneeling quietly at midnight with a bucket and a cloth, scrubbing out what no one else wanted to see. She always kept a wilted white rose in her pocket. Not for beauty, not for romance, but because it reminded her that even something broken could still hold meaning. It carried the scent of lavender and rain, like her mother's hair on Sundays. That evening it had rained softly. The lobby glistened like a mirror, and the air smelled of sea salt and lemon polish. Emma was cleaning the side corridor outside the wine bar, an area she liked for its quietness, when she began humming. Her tune her mother used to sing, low and slow like a lullaby whispered to no one. She didn't see the man who stopped behind her. Garrett Whitmore wasn't meant to be there. The billionaire owner of the hotel, founder of Whitmore Estates Vineyards, rarely walked unannounced through the property. But that night he'd had a bitter call with his estranged son and couldn't bear the stillness of his penthouse suite. So he wandered. And then he heard it. The voice, soft, wounded, honest. He paused, not because she was beautiful, he hadn't even seen her face yet, but because something about that sound made the air shift. He stood, watching her from a distance as she scrubbed the floor with steady hands, and her head bowed. The rose peeked from her pocket. Her shoes were worn, her braid loose. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. Only for a second. Emma blinked quickly, startled, and lowered her gaze. She didn't know who he was, or maybe she did and chose to pretend otherwise. Either way, she stood, dipped her cloth into the bucket and quietly walked past him. Garrett didn't speak, he didn't move, but something inside him did. Something that had been frozen for years. Back in his suite, the silence felt heavier. That face, that voice followed him. He poured himself a glass of his most expensive Merlot and didn't finish it. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The next morning, Emma woke before sunrise. Her grandmother, Margaret, had coughed through the night. Emma brewed herbal tea, kissed her forehead, and stepped out into the chilled morning with a shopping list and a knot in her stomach. Rain clung to the cobblestones, and the town smelled of wet bark and chimney smoke. She returned just in time to change into her uniform and hurry to work, hair still damp. That night she was assigned to the executive floor, a place she rarely touched. Only senior staff handled those suites. But someone had called in sick, and Emma, without protest, was given the 15th floor. She hesitated at room 1502. It was larger than the others, with heavy velvet curtains and spotless glass. The scent inside was masculine and unfamiliar. Oak, wine, and something soft like bergamot. She moved quickly, making the bed, aligning the towels. Then she saw it. On the pillow, a fresh white rose. And beside it, a folded note in careful handwriting. Sometimes the quietest song can silence the loudest storm. Her breath caught. Was it meant for her? Of course not. But her hands trembled as she slid the note into her pocket. She didn't know it was Garrett's room, didn't know that he'd left the rose intentionally. She only knew that for the first time, she felt seen. Over the next few days, small things began to change. Roses appeared again, once in the staff lounge, another time on her cleaning cart, always fresh, always white. Emma said nothing. She didn't dare believe. Garrett, on the other hand, began showing up late at night, wandering near the staff areas without explanation. When questioned, he said he was just inspecting things. But he knew why. He wanted to hear that voice again. He wanted to see her eyes. He wanted to know who she was. One evening, Emma found a single white rose placed inside a water glass at the end of the janitor's table. No note this time, just the flower glowing under the harsh kitchen lights. She stood there, heart pounding, because deep down, something had begun to bloom. Garrett Whitmore lived his life like a meticulously aged bottle of wine, sealed, controlled, untouched by chaos. From the outside, he had everything: a billion-dollar vineyard empire, properties in every time zone, political influence, and a name whispered with reverence in high society circles. But behind the prestige, Garrett moved through his own world like a ghost in tailored suits. He had learned to live without fire. He hadn't always been like this. Years ago, before the emptiness set in, Garrett had known warmth. He had married young, not for power but for love. Elise had been a painter, wild and laughing, with hands always stained in color. She brought music into his wine-stained world. She softened the edges of his ambition. And she died too soon. A car accident on a stormy night. No warning, no goodbye. After her death, something inside Garrett collapsed. He buried himself in expansion projects and acquisitions, expanding the Whitmore legacy as if success could silence grief. He pulled away from his son, Daniel, blaming teenage rebellion for the distance, though deep down he knew it was his own silence that built the wall between them. Love to Garrett had become a liability. He dated strategically, never passionately. Attended galas with models who knew better than to ask about his past. For years, this arrangement worked. No vulnerability, no risk, until that night. Until her voice. The sound had been so faint, so fragile, yet it cut through everything. Garrett couldn't explain it. He couldn't rationalize why a girl's soft humming outside the wine bar stopped him in his tracks. But it did. And then he saw her. Not in a glamorous dress, not at an elite fundraiser. She was kneeling on the marble floor with a mop in her hand and a rose in her pocket. A hotel maid. Young, plain, forgettable in any other context, and yet unforgettable. That moment stayed with him, like the aftertaste of a vintage he couldn't name, but couldn't forget. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning he called the front desk and inquired who was assigned to that floor. He asked out of operational curiosity, dismissing his assistant's lifted eyebrow. He told himself he just wanted to ensure employees weren't overworked. But then he left a rose in his suite, then a note. Garrett wasn't impulsive. He didn't play games. But something about this girl stirred a part of him that had been asleep for years. It wasn't lust, at least not in the way he knew it. It was something quieter, a desire to notice, to understand. He began walking the service hallways late at night. She never noticed him, or maybe she pretended not to. And Garrett, who had conquered boardrooms and governors with his stare, found himself nervous. He didn't even know her name until the 5th night. He overheard 2 staff members whispering, "Emma, the one who sings sometimes." Emma. The name echoed in his chest like a ripple through still water. He typed it into his phone one night, just the name, and stared at the screen as if the letters would give him permission to feel. Emma. That same evening, he received a call from Olivia Prescott. Just her voice on the line was enough to tighten the muscles in his back. Olivia had once been his fiancée, a woman of pedigree and perfect reputation. Her family owned half the wineries in Northern California and had arranged the engagement more for stock mergers than romance. Garrett had ended things when he realized Olivia loved his name more than his heart. But Olivia never forgot a slight, and she never lost a game she cared to win. Now, after 2 years abroad, she wanted to reconnect. Garrett, out of habit, agreed to a polite dinner, but when the night came, he cancelled. He couldn't stop thinking about Emma, not the way she looked, though there was something luminous about her eyes, but the way she made the world quieter. Garrett began noticing things he hadn't seen in years. The smell of pine near the coastal cliffs, the way sunlight hit the stained glass in the hotel chapel, the handwritten notes left by housekeeping staff. The world, once muted, had color again. One night, standing on the balcony of his private suite, glass of wine untouched in his hand, he wondered when exactly he had started living only for image. His days were scheduled to the minute, his interactions rehearsed. But Emma's presence wasn't part of a plan. She disrupted his order, and yet she calmed his soul. He knew he had to speak to her, to cross the line between observer and participant. But he didn't want to frighten her. Garrett had built a life where people only saw his power. He didn't want to use it now, he wanted to earn her gaze. And so he waited, left more roses, walked the same hallways, asked the kitchen staff to send an extra dessert to the janitor's lounge on Thursday nights. He didn't know if she connected the dots, but he hoped. One evening, after a meeting with potential investors, Garrett paused by the security monitors behind the reception desk. He spotted Emma on the screen, seated alone in the garden area, holding a book and rubbing her temples. She looked exhausted, and he felt something break. He wasn't sure what it was, only that it had been holding him back for years. It happened so quickly, and yet time slowed to a hush. Emma was adjusting the lace cover on a tray cart in the main hallway of the hotel's east wing, her mind elsewhere, on her grandmother's medication, on the water bill, on the ache in her shoulders that hadn't left in weeks. The world around her was noise and motion, heels tapping on tile, murmurs of wealthy guests, the faint hum of a piano from the lounge, and then silence. She turned instinctively, as if someone had spoken her name. He was standing there, Garrett. But she didn't know that yet. To her, he was just a tall man in a grey suit with presence that filled the hallway like a tide coming in. His eyes met hers, clear, storm-colored, unreadable. For a split second, she forgot who she was. Garrett had walked that corridor dozens of times, but never like this. Never searching, never hoping. And now there she was, turning to him with surprise in her eyes and a cloth in her hand, as if she'd been caught in something sacred. She looked away first. Of course she did. People like her always looked down. But something in her posture, an old grace, not submission, struck him hard. She didn't scurry. She didn't smile falsely. She simply returned to her work. He kept walking, but slowly, eyes lingering. That moment haunted them both. Emma tried to shake it off, tried to tell herself it meant nothing. Guests looked at staff all the time. But that look, it hadn't been impatient or dismissive. It had been still, curious. A pause in the middle of chaos. Later that night, as she wiped the brass rails of the main staircase, she found something on the step. A small card folded. On it, in handwritten ink. Some silences speak louder than voices. No name. Just those words. She tucked it into her apron and didn't tell anyone, but her breath stayed shallow for the rest of her shift. Garrett sat in his office that evening, watching the lights blink across the bay. He'd made deals in that room, signed contracts worth more than most people made in a lifetime, and yet tonight his thoughts were occupied by the way a girl turned her head, the look in her eyes, the quiet of her presence. He told himself it was absurd, that he was just lonely, that it would pass. But he couldn't forget. The next day he passed her again, this time in the staff wing near the laundry chute. She didn't see him, was too busy folding towels with practiced speed, but he paused anyway, just long enough to notice the way her fingers moved, the way she paused to straighten one towel twice before stacking it. Deliberate, gentle. He said nothing, just kept walking. Emma felt something and turned, but he was already gone. It became a ritual. He would find her without looking, in the garden dusting the leaves of potted plants, in the hallway fixing the alignment of the rug, always in motion, always quiet. And yet, she was beginning to notice the pattern too. The same cologne lingering in places she passed. The same folded cards, each with a line more intimate than the last. Sometimes the smallest light reaches the darkest places. There's more truth in your silence than in most speeches I've heard. Each time she found one, her chest tightened. She didn't tell anyone. Not her co-workers, not her grandmother, not even herself, really. Because how do you speak of something that hasn't begun, but already stirs your soul? One evening, she was asked to deliver fresh linens to the rooftop suite. Her palms were sweaty as she entered the private elevator. It was the first time she had ever been up there. The doors opened to a corridor so quiet, it felt like a church. She knocked once. No answer. When she entered, the room was empty, but warm. A fire flickered in the hearth. A glass of wine sat untouched. And there, beside the window, was a small white rose in a water glass, and another note. If this world had more people like you, maybe I'd believe in it again. She turned slowly, unsure whether to cry or run. That was the moment Garrett walked in. He froze. She did too. They were alone now. Emma stood holding the linens against her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought no one was here." Garrett took a step forward, then stopped. "You're Emma," he said. She blinked. "Yes, sir," she replied, unsure whether it was a statement or a question. He smiled faintly. "You don't need to call me sir." Silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just charged. "You left the notes?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Because, for the first time in a very long time, I saw someone I didn't want to forget." Emma didn't speak, couldn't. Garrett stepped aside. "You can go." But she didn't move. And then, without another word, she placed the linens on the dresser, turned toward him, and smiled. Not a flirtatious smile, not polite, just real. And that was when Garrett knew. He was no longer in control of this. That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling of the small room she shared with her grandmother. Outside, rain tapped gently on the window pane. Her fingers traced the edge of the last note over and over. She wasn't naive. She knew men like him didn't belong in her world, but part of her didn't care, and part of her already did. Olivia Prescott returned to California with the scent of expensive perfume and unfinished business. She stepped off the private jet in Los Angeles, with her heels clicking against the runway like punctuation marks. Everything about her presence announced purpose. Her hair was glossy and pinned, her sunglasses hid sharp eyes, and her fingers curled around her phone like it was an extension of her will. 2 years in Europe had done nothing to soften her. If anything, Olivia had become more refined, more precise, like a diamond that had been recut until it could cut anything. And now she was back to reclaim what she still believed was hers. Garrett Whitmore. She hadn't planned on staying long. Just enough time to be seen, to be remembered, to insert herself into his path like a memory that refused to fade. Her name still echoed in the circles that mattered. Her family still held power over half the vineyard estates north of San Francisco. But what she hadn't expected was the shift. Garrett wasn't where he used to be, emotionally, physically, or socially. He no longer attended the same fundraisers. He wasn't on the cover of industry magazines. And when she arrived unannounced at Cypress Bay, she didn't find him at the bar or his suite. He was walking the side garden, alone, with a softer face, a quieter gait, and no Olivia on his arm. She smiled to herself. That makes it easier. Emma first saw Olivia from the staff hallway. It was impossible not to notice her. She was like a storm dressed in silk. Emma was delivering clean glassware to the lounge when the elevator doors opened and Olivia stepped out, escorted, of course, by 2 concierge attendants and a luggage porter. For a moment, their eyes met. Olivia looked directly at her. Not around her, not through her. At her. Emma, caught off guard, simply nodded and kept walking. But Olivia turned her head slowly and said, loud enough for others to hear, "Well, I see the hotel has diversified its hiring." The tone wasn't overtly cruel. It was worse than that. It was sweet, sharp, coated in poison and lace. Emma didn't respond. She had learned long ago that silence was stronger than dignity when wielded with control, but her chest burned. That night, Garrett was surprised when Olivia appeared in the private lounge of the hotel, seated with a glass of his reserve Syrah already in hand. He approached cautiously. "You're back." She rose with a smile that had once disarmed senators. "Surprised?" "A little," he admitted. "I thought you were still in Italy." "I was, but I missed home and old friends." Her gaze lingered too long. Garrett sat, though something in him tightened. Olivia began the usual dance. Charming conversation, nostalgia-tinged compliments, reminders of shared pasts. She laughed a little too loudly, crossed her legs a little too intentionally, but Garrett didn't respond the way he used to, because the truth was, he wasn't the same man. He wasn't interested in her games. He was thinking of Emma, of her silence, of her smile, of the way her presence made the world gentler. He ended the meeting early, said he had an early call. Olivia smiled as he left, but her eyes hardened. She saw it, the shift, and she didn't like it. Not one bit. The next few days, Olivia became a shadow in Garrett's world, always nearby, always watching. She made sure to be seen, at the vineyard tours, at the hotel spa, even outside the small flower shop where Emma sometimes stopped before work. It wasn't difficult for Olivia to find out about the girl. A few questions to the right people, a look through employee files, a quiet chat with the front desk. Emma Taylor, no father on record, grandmother ill, cleaning staff, not legally married, not wealthy, not important. But she had Garrett's attention, and that was enough for Olivia to decide. She would destroy her. Emma began to notice small changes. Her locker was tampered with. One of her schedules disappeared. Her name was called to HR over a towel count that she had triple-checked. But the worst came one morning when immigration officials showed up at the hotel. They asked for her. She was taken to a room, questioned about her citizenship, her grandmother's medical care, her employment. They claimed inconsistencies in her paperwork, documents she knew were intact. Her hands trembled the whole time. She didn't cry, but something inside her cracked. When she returned home that night, she said nothing to her grandmother, just sat by the window in silence holding a tea mug she never drank from. She didn't sleep. Garrett found out 2 days later, too late. Emma had taken a leave of absence, left no forwarding address, only a note to the hotel's staff manager thanking them for the opportunity. Garrett stared at the screen in disbelief, and then his jaw tightened. He made 3 calls that night, one to a private investigator, one to his legal team, and one to his own soul, because the moment Emma disappeared, Garrett realized something he hadn't said out loud, even to himself. He needed her. Not just wanted, needed. Not to save her, but to find himself again. The vineyard that stretched behind Cypress Bay was known for its elegance. Endless rows of vines, kissed by sun and coastal breeze, wrapped in silence and memory. But that night, the quiet was shattered by the sharp scream of sirens and the glow of something burning behind the hills. It started as a flicker, an electrical fault in one of the processing units. A faulty wire, some say. Others whispered it was sabotage. But when the alarms went off, there was no time for theories, only action. Garrett was at the hotel when it happened, alone in his office, reviewing contracts with distant eyes. The scent of Emma still clung to his thoughts like the faint trace of lavender after a storm. He had been lost in regret when the phone rang. "Sir, there's a fire, the west side of the vineyard." The next 10 minutes were a blur. He rushed into his car, tires screeching against the wet pavement, heart pounding against his ribs like a fist demanding answers. Smoke rose fast, dark, violent, hungry. He could hear the panic in the workers' voices, the clash of metal, the distant barking of the vineyard dogs. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Emma. She hadn't planned to be there. Emma had returned to the city outskirts to clear her mind. She wasn't ready to face anyone, least of all Garrett. But that evening something pulled her near the hotel grounds. Maybe instinct, maybe fate. She had been walking along the cliffs when she saw the orange cloud rising beyond the trees. Without thinking, she ran. not toward safety but toward the flames. Garrett was inside the fermentation hall when the ceiling began to crack. He was trying to locate 2 missing staff members. Both had been seen in the control room. The heat was unbearable. He could barely see. The smoke clawed into his lungs and his body threatened to collapse under the weight of it all. Then came a voice, soft, terrified, but unmistakable. "Garrett!" He turned. Barely. She was there. Emma. Covered in ash, eyes wide, breathing hard. She looked like a ghost. His ghost. And in that moment, the fire around them felt like nothing compared to the chaos in his chest. "What are you doing here?" he choked. "I saw the smoke. I didn't know where else to go," she said, coughing. "They said you were still inside." Garrett reached for her arm. "You shouldn't be here, Emma. This is dangerous." "I know," she whispered. "But I couldn't. Not after everything." They didn't have time for more words. The structure behind them groaned. "Come," he ordered. "We have to get out." But as they moved, the floor gave way in part of the hall. Garrett stumbled. Emma grabbed his arm, pulled him hard. He landed harshly, but avoided the drop. He looked up at her. For a second, all he saw was light, her silhouette surrounded by chaos, her hand outstretched, trembling, but strong. She saved him. They made it outside minutes before the roof caved in. Fire crews rushed past them. Staff members cried out. Chaos unfolded in a dozen directions. But in that second, standing on the gravel road with ash falling like snow, Garrett only saw her. Emma collapsed to her knees, breath shaking, body shivering. He knelt beside her. "You're hurt?" he asked, voice raw. She shook her head. "Just scared." He took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The night roared around them. But inside that small silence, something shifted. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. And Garrett let her. Not as the hotel owner, not as a billionaire, not as the man everyone feared. Just a man, breathing, grateful, awakened. Later, in the stillness of the hotel's infirmary, Garrett returned with bandages and tea. Emma sat on the edge of the cot, her hands blackened, her cheeks streaked from tears she hadn't realized she'd cried. He handed her the tea. Their fingers brushed. "You shouldn't have been there," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I'm glad you were." Their eyes met. Garrett wasn't sure what to do with the emotions clawing at his chest. Gratitude, guilt, wonder, something deeper. He sat beside her, not touching, just near. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he murmured. She turned to him. And yet, it did. Another silence passed between them. He leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. "I've built so much that doesn't matter," he whispered. "And tonight I nearly lost what does." Emma looked down at her hands. "I didn't save you because of what you own," she said. "I know." She glanced at him, something flickering in her gaze. "I saved you because no one deserves to die alone, not even men who forget how to feel." He exhaled, a sound more like a release than a sigh. She stood slowly, the coat still around her. "I should go," she said. Garrett rose, suddenly not wanting the moment to end. "Emma, wait." She paused, turned. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Dinner, just you and me. Not here, somewhere quiet. Tomorrow." She hesitated. He added softly, "Please." Emma didn't answer right away. She walked toward the door, then looked back. A faint smile curved her lips. "All right," she said. And then she was gone. But this time, he knew she would come back. The restaurant Garrett chose wasn't one of the glittering rooftop spots the press expected him to frequent. It was quiet, tucked away at the edge of town, nestled between an old bookstore and a bakery that closed before sunset. Candlelight flickered in worn glass jars. The walls were lined with second-hand paintings, and the faint scent of basil drifted from the kitchen. He arrived first. He wore no tie, just a simple black shirt, the top button undone. His hair was less precise than usual, and his phone lay forgotten on the table. For once, Garrett didn't rehearse what he would say. He didn't need to impress. He only needed to be present. And then she walked in. Emma, wearing a navy dress that fell just below her knees, with her braid over one shoulder and a thin shawl wrapped around her. She looked unsure, like someone stepping into a room they were told they didn't belong in. But she walked toward him anyway, holding his gaze. Garrett stood, pulled out her chair. She murmured a thank you and sat down, eyes darting around nervously. He smiled. "You came." She nodded. "You asked." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. They spoke about little things at first, the soup, the paintings, how the wind always seemed to find its way into old buildings no matter how well you sealed the windows. Emma told him she used to work in a bakery for 2 summers. Garrett said he had never baked a single thing in his life. She laughed. It was soft and quick, like she didn't trust herself to enjoy it too much. Then came the stillness, a moment when neither reached for their fork or napkin. They just looked. "I didn't expect this," she said quietly. He tilted his head. "This? You. Here, with me." Garrett leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I didn't expect you to run into a burning building for someone like me." Emma looked down. Her fingers curled around the stem of her glass. "I didn't do it for the man they write about," she whispered. "I did it for the man who left flowers where no one else would see." Garrett didn't speak, but something in him unraveled. After dinner, they walked, not back to the hotel, just through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, where lampposts buzzed and the pavement held the day's heat. Their steps matched in rhythm. He held his hands behind his back. She walked with her shawl wrapped tight, though the night was warm. Garrett pointed toward a boarded-up cinema. "First date I ever went on was in there. I was 14. Took a girl to see an action movie. She hated it." Emma smiled. "Did she ever go out with you again?" He chuckled. "No, can't blame her." She glanced at him. "You laugh differently when you're not surrounded by money." He stopped walking. She stopped too. "Is that what you see?" he asked softly. Emma turned to face him. Her voice was steady. "No, that's what the world sees. I see something else." He didn't ask what. He was too afraid of the answer, or too hopeful. They sat on a bench near the old train station. No trains ran through there anymore, but the platform still stood, worn and echoing with memories. Garrett exhaled. "I used to think silence meant failure, that if I wasn't speaking or leading or achieving, I was wasting time." Emma looked at the sky. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now I realize silence is the only place where truth has room to speak." She turned to him slowly, meeting his gaze. Her eyes weren't just brown, they were deep, like soil after rain. Quiet. Alive. He wanted to touch her hand. He didn't. She didn't move either. But in that space between them, something bloomed. A tenderness, not born from passion but from recognition. Two people who had spent too long being seen for their roles, one as the rich, broken man, the other as the girl in uniform. Now, they were just Garrett and Emma. And that was more intimate than any kiss. When he drove her home, the car ride was wordless, but it wasn't empty. Emma leaned her head slightly against the window, her eyes half closed. Garrett glanced at her once, then again. The soft light from the dashboard carved gentle shadows across her cheek. He didn't want the night to end, but he respected that it must. He parked near the edge of her street. The little house with peeling paint and wildflowers in cans looked even smaller next to the size of what they were beginning to feel. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For not expecting more than this." He gave a half smile. "Emma, this is everything." She opened the door, paused, then turned back. "Good night, Garrett." And just before she stepped out, she placed her hand over his for a brief second. Warm, light, human. It was the gentlest goodbye he had ever received. Back inside her home, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, fingers still tingling from that touch. Her grandmother snored softly in the next room. Outside, the night went on like any other, but something in Emma had changed, and she knew it. Meanwhile, Garrett stood alone in his penthouse suite, but this time the silence didn't suffocate him. It made room. He walked to his bookshelf, pulled out an old leather-bound notebook, and opened it. On the first page, he wrote, "I don't know what this is yet, but it feels like something I never let myself hope for." He paused, and then added, "And for once, I don't want to control it. I just want to follow it." He closed the book and exhaled. The charity gala was the kind of event that graced magazine covers and whispered through corridors of power. Held annually at the Cypress Bay Hotel, it was a night where California's elite gathered under chandeliers to sip rare wines, make empty toasts, and trade influence under the guise of generosity. Emma had never been inside the ballroom. She'd polished the silverware for events like this, set tables, scrubbed floors after champagne had spilled, but she'd never seen the room lit up, full of laughter and violins. Until now. She had been invited by Garrett. He didn't say much when he asked, just showed up outside the staff exit after her shift, leaned against his car and offered her a small white box. Inside, a dress, midnight blue, simple, flowing, not flashy, just right. "I'd like you to come with me," he said softly. Emma's throat tightened. "To the gala?" "Yes, as my guest." She stared at him. "But, no but, I want them to see you, like I do." She nodded, slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter whatever this was becoming. The night of the gala, Emma stood in front of the mirror in her grandmother's room, the dress hugging her like a memory she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. Her hair was pinned loosely, her braid curled around one shoulder. Her shoes were borrowed. Her heart raced. Her grandmother held her hand before she left. "You're allowed to shine, darling. Don't shrink tonight." Emma smiled, but her chest ached with nerves. When she entered the ballroom, every head turned. Not because she was loud or extravagant, but because she didn't belong. Not in their world. And yet, there she was. Garrett was waiting near the center of the room. His gaze never left her. He moved through the crowd and offered her his hand like she was royalty. Emma took it, lightly, cautiously, and together they walked into the lion's den. People whispered. Some smiled falsely. Others stiffened. But Emma kept her head up, until Olivia appeared. Dressed in crimson, with diamonds like daggers on her ears, Olivia walked with the air of someone who believed the room revolved around her. And maybe once it had. She approached them slowly, smiling as if the moment had been rehearsed. "Garrett," she purred, "you look unexpectedly generous tonight." He nodded politely. "Olivia," her eyes turned to Emma, scanning, judging, slicing. "And this must be your new employee." Emma opened her mouth, but no sound came. Garrett's hand stiffened around hers. "She's not my employee," he said firmly. Olivia tilted her head. "Oh? Then what is she?" A beat of silence, and then Garrett spoke. "She's with me." It wasn't loud, but the words landed like thunder. The room paused. Emma felt the air vanish from her lungs. Olivia blinked once, then smiled. "How quaint." She stepped closer. Too close. "You clean floors, don't you?" she asked Emma sweetly. Emma looked up, finally meeting her gaze. "Yes, and I do it well." A few gasps scattered in the background. Olivia's smile faltered for half a breath. Then she turned. "Excuse me, I think I smell bleach." And just like that, she walked away. But the damage had been done, not by Olivia, by the room. Eyes followed them all night. Conversations hushed when they passed. Emma felt every stare like a stone in her shoe. But Garrett stayed by her side. He offered her wine, whispered jokes, touched her hand under the table like a secret promise. Still, something in her heart trembled. She had never felt more seen or more exposed. Later, as they stood near the balcony, Garrett leaned in. "You were incredible tonight." Emma looked at him, vulnerable. "Did I embarrass you?" He stepped closer. "You honored me." She didn't reply. He touched her cheek, just lightly. "Emma, I'm proud to be seen with you." Tears stung the corners of her eyes. "I'm not used to this," she whispered. "Neither am I," he said, "but I don't want to hide." She turned toward the view, lights flickering across the bay. "They'll come after me now," she murmured. He didn't hesitate. "Then they'll have to come through me." In the shadows of the ballroom, Olivia watched. and for the first time in years, she felt something rare. Not jealousy, but threat. Real, burning threat. Because Garrett had never looked at her that way. Not even once. After the gala, whispers began to crawl through the golden corridors of Cypress Bay like smoke under a door. She's just a maid. He's lost his mind. She must have done something to him. Some murmurs were cruel, others were cloaked in concern, but all carried the same undercurrent. Emma didn't belong. And worse, she was becoming visible. Olivia didn't need to shout. She was more dangerous than that. She made calls, quiet ones, to hotel board members, to local officials, to one particular man in the immigration office who owed her father a favor. She smiled as she planted seeds, then sat back and waited for the garden of destruction to bloom. At first, Emma didn't notice the change. She kept showing up on time, kept folding towels, kept smiling at guests who wouldn't remember her name. But behind the scenes, the world she worked in had shifted. One morning she was called to HR. "We've had reports," the manager said without looking up. "You were seen entering private guest rooms off duty." Emma froze. "That's not true." The woman handed her a printed photo, grainy, angled Emma holding linens outside Garrett's suite. "I was delivering towels. I was scheduled." The manager gave a tight-lipped nod. "We'll be reviewing all staff activities. Until then, we're placing you on temporary suspension." Emma's hands trembled as she took the letter. The next day, the landlord of the modest apartment she'd rented temporarily knocked on her door. He held a legal notice. Her rental agreement was being reviewed due to irregular documentation. Emma stood at the doorway, breath shallow, her heart pounding like it had the night of the fire, but colder now. This wasn't flames. This was ice. She packed her things in silence, returned to the only place she had left, her grandmother's small wooden house. She didn't tell Garrett. Not yet. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she knew he would try to fix it, and some battles needed to be faced alone. Meanwhile, Garrett sensed something. Emma's replies to his texts had grown shorter. Her voice, when they spoke, was softer, like something had gone dim. He invited her to dinner again. She declined, said she had to rest, said she had things to take care of. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know how deep it ran. Not until the hotel's concierge slipped an anonymous letter into his hand. Inside, a printout of an online post titled "The Maid and the Mogul, a Scandal in Uniform." It included photos of Emma entering the hotel from the back entrance, a shot of her looking down while Garrett spoke on a stage. The implication was obvious: manipulation, seduction, ambition. Garrett's blood boiled. He stormed into the public relations office. "Take this down, all of it now." "We can't," someone said weakly. "It's already everywhere." He called Emma. No answer. Called again. Still nothing. Then the hotel director, pressured by board members, called him into a meeting. "She's becoming a liability," they said. Garrett rose from the table. "She's the only thing here that's not." But the weight of power, legacy, and scrutiny was pressing in, and Olivia was watching. That night, Emma received a visit, not from Garrett, from immigration officers. 2 of them, suits, badges, cold stares. "There's been a complaint," one said. "We need to verify your legal status and your grandmother's documentation." Emma tried to explain, tried to show papers, but they took her in anyway. 6 hours in a freezing room with a ticking clock and no windows. 6 hours of questions about her family, her past, her employment. No one told Garrett. By the time she was released, the damage had been done. Her spirit had cracked. Not broken, but cracked. She returned home, eyes hollow. Garrett arrived the next morning. He banged on the door. "Emma, it's me!" Her grandmother opened it slowly. "She's resting," she said gently. "She hasn't said much since yesterday." Garrett stepped inside, found Emma on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the window. She looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with a kind of quiet acceptance. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered. "You don't have to, I'll handle it." She shook her head. "You can't protect me from people who think I'm less." "You're not. They don't care." He knelt in front of her. "I'll fight them." She reached for his hand. held it gently. You already have, but sometimes leaving is the only way to survive. He froze. What are you saying? Emma stood slowly. I need to disappear for a while. No, I need to breathe. He stood too. Let me come with you. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. This isn't your storm to walk through. And with that she kissed his cheek, soft, final and full of everything she couldn't say. Then she left. Garrett stood at the door long after it closed. Still, empty, but not defeated. Because something in her silence ignited something in him, and this time he wouldn't stay still. Garrett had never driven himself this far before, not physically, not emotionally. He'd always had drivers, assistants, maps, schedules, but now his hands gripped the steering wheel of a dusty old Range Rover, and the only thing guiding him was a thread of memory and a name his heart kept repeating: Emma. The house was empty when he returned to her grandmother's place. A neighbor said she'd packed a few things and left quietly at dawn. No forwarding address, no message, just silence. But silence, Garrett had learned, often held the loudest truths. He packed a bag that same night and left the hotel. No press release, no security. Just a photograph of Emma and her grandmother he had saved on his phone, and a memory. A blue ribbon in her hair the night of the gala. He remembered it fluttering behind her as she turned to him. It wasn't just decoration, it was identity, and it would guide him now. The first town he stopped in was a place so small it didn't show up on digital maps. He asked a grocery clerk if they had seen a girl with long brown hair and eyes that looked like twilight. The woman blinked and shook her head. No one like that around here, she said. Garrett left a 20 on the counter anyway. At night, he slept in old motels with peeling paint and humming fridges. He wrote in a small notebook, the same one he'd started after their first dinner. The world feels dull without her. I don't know what I'm chasing. Maybe it's not her footsteps, but the parts of me that only exist in her presence. He didn't shave, didn't check the stock market. Time was no longer measured in minutes, but in miles between heartbeats. In the third town, he saw it. A blue ribbon, tied to a wooden fence outside a small flower shop. The wind tugged at it gently, like a whisper. He parked, entered. The shop was empty except for an old woman behind the counter, wrapping lavender in brown paper. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for someone. Her name's Emma. She has a grandmother. They may have moved nearby." The woman looked up. Something in her eyes changed. "You're the man from the hotel?" His breath caught. "You know her?" The woman nodded. "She lives just past the hill. Small cottage. Used to belong to a school teacher." Garrett's voice was barely a whisper. "Is she all right?" "She's healing," the woman said, "but she's not expecting visitors." He smiled faintly. "Neither was I." He drove slowly. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt. Birds scattered as he passed. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke from firewood. And then he saw it. A small house, flowers in tin cans, a wind chime made of silver spoons, a porch swing swaying, even though there was no breeze. Emma was sitting on the steps, barefoot, holding a book. She looked up, and time stopped. She didn't smile, not at first, just stared, like she wasn't sure if he was real or a memory her heart had conjured again. Garrett stepped out of the car. He didn't rush, didn't speak. He walked to the foot of the steps, then knelt. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said. Emma blinked. "For what?" "For letting them touch you, for not getting to you sooner, for not burning the world down when they tried to shame you." She closed the book. He kept going. "This world may not be mine anymore, the money, the press, the legacy, but if there's one thing I want to fight for..." He looked up. "It's you." A silence wrapped around them. Then she whispered, "Why now?" "Because I finally stopped asking what I could lose," he said, "and started asking what I could live without." She stood, walked down the steps. He rose to meet her. Emma reached out slowly. Her hand touched his chest, right over his heart. It was racing. "You're a mess," she said. He smiled. "I know." Her voice softened. "And I don't know if I can trust all this yet." "I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" Garrett swallowed. Let me stay. Not as a guest. Not as a stranger trying to win you. Just let me learn who I am in your world. She didn't reply, but she didn't pull her hand away. She simply turned and walked back toward the porch, then paused and looked over her shoulder. Well, you coming or not? That night he slept in a guest room with a thin mattress and the scent of dried herbs. The window creaked. The heater groaned. But Garrett had never slept deeper. In the morning, he found Emma outside, hanging laundry between two trees. Her hair was messy, her feet muddy. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He walked up behind her, unsure if he should speak. She answered without turning. There's coffee on the stove. He smiled. He didn't need anything more than that. Not yet. The mornings in the village were different. They didn't begin with alarms or boardroom schedules. They began with the sound of wind brushing against tall grass, the creak of the old porch swing, and the scent of coffee brewed in a tin pot over a gas stove. Garrett had never lived like this, but somehow it didn't feel foreign. It felt like remembering. He woke early, though there was nowhere to rush. He folded his own blanket, opened the windows, stepped outside barefoot. The ground was cold, damp with dew. Emma was already awake. She always was. She hummed softly as she swept the kitchen. Her movements were unhurried, sacred in their simplicity. There was no makeup, no mask, just the girl who once held the whole weight of the world in silence and still walked with grace. He watched her as if trying to memorize the shape of peace. They didn't speak much at first, not because there was tension, but because silence had become their shared language. A soft place between everything they'd lost and everything they were trying to become. Emma tended to the garden. Garrett chopped firewood, clumsily at first, until he stopped aiming for perfection. They cooked side by side, ate in the glow of candlelight, not out of romance, but because the electricity sometimes flickered. At night, they sat on the porch and wrote in a shared notebook. It had started the second evening. Garrett had placed it on the table between them and handed her a pen. No pressure, he said. Just write whatever you can't say. Emma hesitated, then wrote, I don't know what this is, but I don't want to lose it. He replied beneath it, I've lost too much not to fight for this. Each night the pages filled, with thoughts, with fears, with fragments of love too fragile to speak aloud. Garrett had never felt so human. He burned the toast twice, accidentally dyed a load of laundry pink, got stung by a bee trying to rescue it from the window, but Emma didn't laugh at him. She smiled, quietly, as if it meant more than any teasing. One afternoon, he asked her to teach him how to knead bread. She nodded. You have to use the heel of your hand and be patient. The dough resists at first. He smirked. Like me. She didn't deny it. But her hands moved beside his, pressing gently, folding with rhythm. And Garrett felt something loosen in his chest, as if the world was finally asking him to stay still. They spent hours in the garden, not speaking. Emma dug her fingers into the earth like it was a prayer. Garrett sat nearby, watching bees stumble through lavender. One day he asked, Do you ever miss the city? Emma wiped her forehead. I miss the libraries. And the people? She shrugged. Not all of them. He tilted his head. What about him? She met his gaze. He left. But the man who showed up here, I think he stayed. Garrett didn't look away. Then maybe I will too. They built a clothesline together, painted the old mailbox, read poetry on rainy days, curled up with blankets and chipped mugs. Emma sang sometimes, soft songs in Spanish and English, melodies that felt like lullabies for grown-up hearts. Garrett listened, always. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, Emma found him in the shed, trying to fix a broken chair. She leaned against the doorframe. Do you miss the noise? She asked. He looked up. No, but I miss proving things. Like what? That I matter. Emma stepped inside, sat on a crate. You don't have to prove that here. He looked at her, eyes dark and vulnerable. I don't know how to be this version of me in your world. She reached for his hand. You already are. Later that night, she found a new page in the notebook. His handwriting, I'm scared that this isn't real, that you'll wake up and remember who I was. She added beneath it, I remember. That's why I believe who you are now. Weeks passed. Garrett began teaching English at the village school twice a week. He wasn't qualified, but the children liked his stories. Emma baked bread for the elderly neighbor. They planted new seeds in the garden. Her grandmother regained strength. And still, nothing was spoken aloud. But everything was understood. In the way he poured her tea before his own. In the way she folded his shirts even when he protested. In the way they walked side by side, never needing to reach for each other's hand, because their hearts were already linked. One morning, Garrett sat at the table and said, I don't want to go back. Emma looked up from her cup. I'm not asking you to, she said, but I want to know if staying here means you're choosing me, he added quietly, or just escaping everything else. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, what if it's both? He nodded. I can live with that. She reached for the notebook and wrote, sometimes love doesn't roar. Sometimes it just shows up and stays. He smiled and added, I'm not leaving. But even as he wrote it, a storm was already forming in the distance. And neither of them knew that Olivia wasn't finished. The headlines hit the internet like a match to dry wood. Former billionaire hiding in countryside with illegal maid? Love or fraud? Garrett Whitmore's fall from grace. Emma Taylor, the immigrant who stole a tycoon's heart, and fortune. The photos weren't new, but the timing was deliberate. One showed Garrett chopping wood in muddy boots, another Emma hanging clothes on a line, laughing. And the worst, an old image of her being escorted by immigration officers taken during the darkest moment of her life. The media didn't care about truth. They wanted blood, and Olivia served it cold. It began with whispers at the vineyard board meetings. Then the lawyers started calling. Then the sponsors. People wanted distance. Investors wanted answers. Garrett had walked away from his empire months ago. But the world hadn't forgotten him, and now it wanted to punish him for loving a girl who didn't fit the frame. Emma found out while picking up canned goods from the market. An old man looked at her twice. The younger woman whispered behind her palm. She knew. She went home in silence, carrying the weight of 1,000 stairs in one bag of groceries. That night, Garrett returned from the school with dirt on his sleeves and anger in his jaw. I saw the article, he said. Emma didn't look up. She was slicing carrots slowly, methodically. Ignore it, she whispered. I won't. Then it'll break you. No, he said, walking closer. It will break us. She finally met his eyes. I told you they'd come for me again. He reached out, gently taking the knife from her hand and setting it down. They're not coming for you this time, he said. They're coming for what we've built. And I'm not running. Emma's voice cracked. But I am. He stepped back, startled. She turned away. I can't watch them destroy you for choosing me. They're not destroying me, he said. They're waking me up. The next morning, Garrett shaved, wore a clean shirt, tied a tie. Emma watched from the doorway, barefoot and quiet. Where are you going? She asked. He didn't turn. To tell the truth. The press conference was hastily arranged at the old town hall, but word spread fast. Reporters came from the city. Cameras lined the steps. Everyone expected denial, spin, silence. Instead, Garrett stepped up to the microphone and took a breath. My name is Garrett Whitmore, he began, and I used to be very proud of that. Flashes sparked. I built things, big things. So I made money, I made rules, and I built walls around my life, my heart, and the people I thought I loved. A pause. Then I met someone, not in a ballroom, not on a yacht, in a hallway, scrubbing floors, murmurs. And she reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't require pedigree, it simply recognizes truth. He looked directly into the cameras. Yes, her name is Emma Taylor. Yes, she's an immigrant. Yes, she once worked for me. But now she's the reason I remember how to breathe. A wave of silence hit the room. I walked away from a world that measured worth by power. I've never felt richer. Another pause. If you want to shame me for that, do it. Print it. Publish it. I'm not hiding." He stepped back, walked away, and the world had to decide what to do with a man who finally had nothing to lose, but everything to protect. Back in the cottage, Emma watched it unfold on the television, her hand over her mouth, tears falling freely. He hadn't just defended her, he'd believed in her. Out loud. 2 days later, a former hotel employee came forward. Her name was Miriam, older, kind eyes. She recorded a video. "In all my years there, I saw people step on Emma like a rug. But she never raised her voice, she never stole a thing. The only thing she ever took was a moment to sing while she worked." The video went viral. Then another woman came forward, then another, and soon, the narrative began to shift, from suspicion to admiration, from scandal to sacrifice. Emma and Garrett sat on the porch that evening, watching the last light fall over the hills. She held the notebook in her lap. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said. "I know." She turned a page, then wrote, "They'll still talk." He took the pen. "Let them. I'd rather be hated for loving you than praised for hiding." She looked at him. "Do you still want this?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He reached for her hand, kissed it gently, and in the hush of twilight, they sat together while the world outside learned how to listen. Spring came quietly to the village, not with fanfare, but with soft blossoms pushing through the soil, with rain tapping gently on rooftops, and with the scent of fresh earth rising into open windows. The world was learning to bloom again. And so were they. Garrett no longer counted days. He didn't need to. Time wasn't measured in deadlines now, but in wildflowers planted, loaves baked, letters written, and songs sung by a kitchen window. Emma was at the center of it all. She moved through the house with sleeves rolled, humming softly, her hands always doing something gentle, folding baby clothes, stirring soup, cradling her stomach, because now she wasn't alone. Hope was growing inside her. When they married, there were no violins, just a tree in full bloom, a circle of neighbors standing in a field. Emma wore a dress sewn by hand, with her mother's ribbon tied around her braid. Garrett wore linen and bare feet. They spoke no vows. They didn't need to. Their eyes held years of ache, fire, and grace. And when Garrett kissed her, it wasn't about passion. It was about peace, about coming home. Their daughter was born during a rainstorm. The candles flickered. The power went out. And still, the world held its breath for her arrival. Garrett held her in his arms as the thunder rolled across the valley. "Hope," Emma whispered. He looked down at the tiny face, eyes blinking slowly, lips trembling with life. "That's her name," she said. Garrett smiled through tears. It always was. Months passed. Garrett built shelves from driftwood. Emma sang to the baby in 2 languages. Their garden overflowed with vegetables and laughter. Children from the village came to learn English. Garrett taught verbs with chalk on a blackboard. Emma baked cookies shaped like letters. Their home became a school, a refuge, a quiet revolution. The world had moved on from their story. Headlines faded. Olivia vanished into silence. But in their corner of the earth, something rare was happening. Love was being cultivated, not with grand gestures, but with morning coffees and soft shoulders to rest on when nights grew long. One morning, as the sun spilled across the kitchen table, Emma asked, "Did you ever imagine your life ending up here?" Garrett looked up from his notebook. He shook his head. "No, and even less. Ending beside an angel with a braid and the voice of an old song." She smiled, touched by the words. He kept writing. "The world taught me how to win, but you taught me how to live." Emma reached for his hand, and just like that, the moment was sacred. Hope grew fast, barefoot, curious, and always humming. She chased chickens, danced in puddles, asked questions about stars and why the moon followed her. Garrett answered with poetry. Emma answered with patience, and every night they tucked her in beneath a blanket stitched with old memories and new beginnings. Then they sat together on the porch, watching the sky change colors. Garrett held the notebook. Emma held his hand, and the silence between them was full of everything words could never hold. In the garden, under the tree where they said yes without speaking, Garrett carved a phrase into the trunk with a pocket knife. Love is not bought, it is grown. Emma stood beside him, hope on her hip, sunlight catching the curls in their daughter's hair. And when she asked one day, "Why here? Why this place, Daddy?" Garrett knelt and pointed to the ground. "Because this," he said, "is where my soul finally learned how to breathe." He thought love was power. She thought she'd never be seen. But somewhere between silence, soil, and a child's breath, they found something neither of them expected. Peace. Not loud, not perfect, just enough. And maybe, isn't that what we're all searching for? If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, where in the world are you listening from? Your presence is what keeps this space alive. Thank you.